Okay, making an equation, I have on here for you what kinds of equations you could make. So you will get this from me on the test, like it would be a formula sheet kind of thing. Okay, so we could go y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. That's called general form. We could do factored form, and you guys know how to factor, which gets you x-intercepts. Okay, so I'm just going to make that as a note there so I remember, like, why would I ever pick that form? Because it would get you x-intercepts. And this would be called vertex form and standard form. Okay, the only difference with those is just where the k is. Okay, and for your purpose, you really want the k on that side because your calculator can only do y equals alone. Right? Y equals needs to be alone when you do it into your calculator, right? So then, to me, I would just be moving that k anyway. Okay, so let's talk about the characteristics again. Okay. I'm going to talk about vertex form. Here we go. This number does what? It moves it left or right. And do you remember our first lesson? It moved it in a opposite way. So what gives me the hint? Do you remember something like the quadratic formula when it reads negative b? That means do the opposite. This reads negative h. So what should you do? The opposite. Okay? And the letter at the end will move it up or down. And then this value was the slope. We know if it's negative, we're flipping. We know if it's bigger than 1, we get skinny. If it's less than 1, we get wide. That's just what that number tells us, okay? That was our very first thing we talked about. I think some of those things are probably on your cheat sheet. The characteristics of this. Okay, but please follow the formula because this says minus, so you're going to do opposite, but that is not. Okay, so number 1, make an equation for a quadratic with a vertex and a slope. So here we go. Y equals, well, the slope is 2, so I'm going to put that into the A spot, bracket, okay, now I'm going to fill in these numbers. So where is the vertex located? Well, this has moved it right 1, and this has moved it down 3. So how do I put those into the positions? Right 1. So you have to do what? Opposite. So you should write subtract 1 because you have to do the opposite of that one. So this was positive 1, so now this says negative 1, and down 3, minus 3. Okay, every time you look at an equation, you should have numbers in place of everything except x's and y's. You always leave x and y open. Okay, here we go. Vertex and a point. Okay, so vertex and a point. Okay, actually, here's what I'm going to do. Let's write the whole thing out. Okay, write that whole thing out. Okay, you ready? I'm going to call the vertex the HK. That's the position of the vertex. So underneath the H, if this says positive 3, I'm going to write minus 3. And the K, so that's up 5. So I'm going to write up 5. Okay, I'm continually doing this. This was the opposite, but this was not. Then a coordinate would be considered an x, comma, a y, any other point. So I'm going to replace x with a 1, and I'm going to replace y with a 1, and it looks like I'm going to have to figure out the a. So we're going to figure out the a. Okay, so here we go. I am going to do this. I'm going to subtract 5 because that's what algebra says to do to isolate something. So I'm going to subtract 5, negative 4. And then I did this 1 subtract 3, which is negative 2. Okay, now I'm going to do this number. What is negative 2 squared? Anything you square is positive. Now algebra, I'm going to divide by 4, and I'm going to get a negative 1 for the slope. Okay, so we need to write our equation. So every time you write your equation, you have to have your slope and your vertex in there, and you got to leave spots for x and y. So here we go. Y equals, so leave y open. A is now a value of negative 1. We figured it out. X is open. And then we wrote minus 3 squared plus 5. So that tells me if I know my vertex and my slope, I can graph stuff. Okay, let's pretend this was my test. What would I do if this was my test? I would check to see if my answer is correct. How would I do that? Well, I would just enter this in. I would graph it, and then I would get my cursor and I would say, well, if I'm at 3, am I on the vertex here? Oh, there, yeah, 3, 5. It looks like it's the vertex. When I'm at 1, am I at the coordinate 1, 1? So I'm going to go to 1. Yeah, there it is, 1, 1. It works. Okay, so that's a method you could do on your test. Okay, number 3 here. Make an equation. So there's our vertex. So what am I going to do? I'm going to put in those numbers into the H and the K positions. So if this was positive 1, I'm going to make sure my formula has a -1 in it. And if this is a +8, I'm going to make sure my formula has a +8. So everybody's with me that this number goes in opposite and this one goes in the same. And it has a y-intercept of 5. Okay, this one's tricky. If you forget this, it's going to leave you stuck. I can't just put in a y-intercept, but I can put in a point. Does anybody know what this would be if I called it a point like that? What would I put? How do you know it's a y-intercept? 0, 5, right? You're going to be replacing y with a 5, and you're going to replace x with a 0. And you're going to figure out your slope. Okay, here we go with the algebra stuff. I'm going to -8. Any number squared, positive or negative, doesn't matter. Any number squared is positive, so please keep that in mind all the time. Okay, so I need you to figure out what kind of function you would put into your calculator. Y equals what? So we know the multiplier A is -3. And then what kind of number are we putting in here? We looked like we had a -1 and a +8. Slope, vertex. Okay, always tell me the slope and the vertex. And then you always can see this should be the opposite and this should be the same. Okay, next one. Make an equation with x-intercepts of this and a y-intercept of that. Right away, I'm going to put this as a point on that, just so I remember. Okay, you ready? This time, I don't know the vertex. So you know what? I am not going to use vertex form. So it told me the x-intercepts, so if I'm going to use x-intercepts, what should I use? I should use this factored form. Okay, so y equals a Okay, so here we go. If the x-intercept is 2, the factor is x minus 2, right? Because this factor gives me an x solution of 2. And if my intercept over here is -6, then the factor was x plus 6. So why did I write opposite? Because the formula told me to minus those values, which means opposite of those values, and we already know how to factor, so we kind of have to think backwards. Okay, so now here's another thing. We have to plug in this point again. We have to replace So this is the x and this is the y. We're going to replace a point. So for y, I'm going to put negative 24. And I'm going to be replacing x with 0. Procrastinated. Nope. Okay, so now just algebra here. So what is negative 2 times 6? So that would be negative 12. I'm going to divide, and I get 2. Okay, final answer is that you have to write an equation with all your numbers plugged in except for x and y now have to be left open so that you can put other points in them because there's a bunch of other points. So y equals, well, the a is now 2, and then we add an x minus 2 and an x plus 6. So I have everything plugged in except for x's and y's are now open again to put other points in there. Now I can also type that into my calculator if I wanted to and check to see if it matched all these things happening. Okay, last question. So it had an x-intercept of 5, but that was also the vertex and a point. Okay, so x-intercept of 5, but it's the vertex. So I'm just going to take a note there that an x-intercept of 5 would be a coordinate 5, 0. And since it's the vertex, we can be using the HK to replace the vertex stuff. And it wants to give me a point, so I can use the point to replace x's and y's. So I'm going to pick this method. Okay, so under the H, I'm going to write subtract 5, opposite, because this was positive 5, so I'm going to go subtract 5. Under the K, I am going to put plus 0, or I'm not going to put anything, whatever, doesn't matter. Okay, under the X, I'm going to put a 3, and under the Y, I'm going to put a negative 4, and then I'm going to determine what A is. Okay, so this wasn't anything, so we're done that. Now this is negative 2 and then negative 2 squared. Make sure some of you are going to type in your calculator. Whatever it is positive. You notice how many times I'm saying this, but somebody's still going to do it, I bet. Okay, so do you see what your calculator would do? This is wrong and this is right. Positive, positive, okay? Okay, show me again how to write your final answer. Your equation has to be a y equals, and make sure x is left alone in this one. Okay. Cheat sheet stuff. Want to get that out right away while it's fresh in your brain? What do you want to put on there? So I would go, given a vertex and a point, use this is my little cheat sheet notes. I would go, if I was given a vertex and a point, that I need to use that. I would tell myself the vertex is where the H and the K come from. I would kind of make a note that I should put in whatever this is. I should go to the opposite in my equation. And then I would say, if I had a point, that would be replacing x's and y's. Okay, and then I'm just going to remind myself my final answer has to look like that with numbers in those spots. And then maybe I'm going to just do this little note for myself that a y-intercept, I need to understand that it is a coordinate, a point. So then I'm going to just do one more thing on my cheat sheet, which now, if I'm given x-intercepts, I should use you know what I'm realizing? I don't like this S. Is anybody else with me on that? Can we make it something different? Because it's confusing me with being a 5. Can we be like a Q or something? I don't know. If it doesn't bother you, that's fine. It keeps bothering me. So I might just do an example on my cheat sheet. So if the x-intercepts are 5 and -2, so then it shows me that I'm making sure I'm using opposites because the formula says to do the opposite because of the subtract sign. So obviously if there is a subtract sign, you put a plus sign. You just do the opposite. Okay, and then I probably would give you a point. You'd have to plug that in. All the time, you're usually having to figure out that slope. So just kind of a big note, you kind of do your plugins, and then you do algebra to get your A's. That's kind of another big idea on that lesson.